Shock Piece: The Search for Freedom. A novel by C. Nguyen. Chapter 47. Time. The clock keeps ticking. The sun keeps rising and setting. The moon keeps shining and disappearing. The lines and wrinkles keep forming on the once smooth, translucent skin. Not so long ago I was terrified of old age, especially looking at your grandmother and at how frail she is now, Trin said to her children. Huh, curiously, nothing has changed. Now the prospect is even more frightening. She laughed at her ambiguity. However, I've learned to think of that process as a matter of course and seem to accept it on better terms. A natural aging process that all living things approach from birth to death. People in her profession, pharmacists, are in daily contact with ailments, afflictions, substance abuse, the elderly, and disease. It is an unromantic and unglamorous way to earn a living, but a fundamental one, nevertheless. Working in a local pharmacy in the southwestern Sydney area, she faced a constant reminder that the human body and mind change with time. One only had to consider the frequent visits of her regular customers whose aging process could be seen in a sudden drop of their independence. Optimal physical well-being and a sound state of mind are threatened as we get older, and it is always heartbreaking for her to witness all these things. To observe a feeble mind that goes even further astray with the help of medications, to watch a patient once living independently on her own, briskly getting around with her daily chores, then suddenly a few weeks later on crutches, moving about with little shaky steps, aided by a relative, a daughter or son, and to be in almost daily contact with patients on methadone, the registered addict's narcotic drug that is used as a replacement for heroin users and dispensed in a pharmacy under a supervised dosing system. To be in shock after hearing sad news from a relative or the neighbor of a regular patient informing of her or his death. This regretfully was only discovered weeks later due to her infrequent visits and her absence from the pharmacy. Added to all these professional duties, as a pharmacist, was the emotional side of the profession. Being local means a friendliness and attachment that gets deeper and deeper with interaction over the years. You're all fortunate in a way, being close by my side most of the time from birth to kindergarten, Trin reminded her children. Trin became the proprietor of her own pharmacy after she became pregnant with her first son, and with the fantastic help of her mother, who made it possible for her children to follow her to her shop every day until the age of kindergarten. The shop was divided into living quarters at the back for her children. She felt that was the most rewarding and happy achievement for them and for her as a full-time working mother. I was able to watch each of you growing up from babyhood to kindergarten and then becoming a teenager. That was the most fantastic time of my life, even though I was busy as a bee, Trin said. When all four were little, Trin told them on the way home by car one evening, "Oh, would you all be quiet? I'm so tired and stressed out. If you keep going on like this, I'll end up in a mental hospital soon." She was about to accelerate straight ahead after the green light at an intersection when Adam said in surprise, "Mum, you didn't turn right. The hospital is that way." He pointed toward the indicated direction, very pleased with himself for being able to help his mother. How sweet children are. Trin knew that for most working mothers, juggling between her career and motherhood was the most difficult mission a woman had to undertake in her life, especially in this modern digital age, and especially for a professional like her. They often have to sacrifice either one or choose to lean toward one or the other. However, Trin was able to manage them both, a mother and a pharmacist on the same road at the same time. "Where's your mother, Carl?" her mother would ask, looking for Trin one morning. She's gone to play her computer games, her 2-year-old second last son would answer. In his innocence, looking at her working in front of the computer in the pharmacy was just like playing games. Thinking back over all those years, she was very glad that she had done what she had. Her sons had rarely been out of her sight since birth, and were under her care until the age of teens. She had brought 4 beautiful human beings into this world, and they had grown into beautiful young adults. She had learnt from them very much as they had learnt from her. They are now in such a friendly relationship that a friend has commented admiringly, "You are just like a sister to them," and I mean that as a compliment. She and her customers cheerfully reminisced about the childish act of her second eldest, Adam, who was 22 years old now, but a toddler at that time, playing with lipsticks and makeup in the pharmacy. She said how peculiar that I could remember like yesterday his tiptoeing on the shelf with a lipstick on one hand and mascara on the other hand. It's a vivid image lasting in my memory down to the last detail regardless of years gone by. But don't you dare ask me what I had for dinner last night. Whatever there was on the table might not even register in my brain. They laughed together at the fond memory. Some commented on how pregnant she was not so long ago with Eddie, the last of the 4 sons, or how young, healthy, and active her mother used to be, bustling around at the back of the shop with her grandchildren. They were her close friends as much as her customers. Her kind of pharmacy was now facing extinction by brutal competition with the arrival of huge chain store pharmacies, from which a personal touch might not be essential anymore. Trin had cried heartily the day one of her neighbors informed her of Mrs. Smith's death in April this year. Every Christmas ever since her first year in this pharmacy, Mrs. Smith had crocheted tea towels personally and gave one to each of them, her assistant and her, a Christmas parcel wrapped up nicely and accompanied by a handwritten card, without fail, for 19 years continuously. At Easter, they had coat hangers or soaps covered with frilly romantic ribbon and silk or lace, her skillful craft, which seemed to belong to yesteryear now. Her psychotic bachelor son looked lost and aged quickly in the last few months after her death. He was a lonely soul who had been seen to keep carrying his mother's wicker chair to the front garden for their regular afternoon sittings every day, as if he did not know that his only companion for the last 50 years or so had gone from his life for good. Trin wished she could have gone to her funeral, and that wish made Trin even more mournful as her death had occurred at the beginning of the year without her knowledge. This simple gesture from a thoughtful and caring customer had made a strong impact on her mind. It had helped Trin draw the conclusion that after death, the everlasting memory of a person comes from their heartfelt, caring acts, which have more value than the vastness of gold itself. Her customer's personal touch on those simple cotton tea towels and her sincere, loving manner had meant more than any other expensive or extravagant gifts Trin had received. How rich a person was in life, unadorned and inconspicuous in reminiscence, compared to how kind and loving he was in death. The act of kindness is always notable and lasts a long time in their absence, Trin believed. Some of her methadone patients had been dosing in the pharmacy for more than a decade. They saw her more often than their parents or children, who either had deserted them or been deserted by them or taken away from them by Social Security service. Drug addiction is a curse, nevertheless, as even with much time and effort, many can never get out of this vicious habit. At best, they could lead a relatively normal life with affordable, legal methadone as the substitute rather than the exorbitantly priced, outlawed heroin from which nasty crimes were being committed in order to possess and use. Trin was very reluctant to enter the program providing methadone dosing at first, and was very scared and naive in the beginning. They were an entirely different category from the regular customers in the pharmacy. Some were plain drug addicts by choice, but the majority were driven to it by circumstances, Trin believed. Many had served jail terms and had lived the kind of disturbed life that was often reflected in creative television dramas. They were actually true-to-life stories. Some told lies like truths. The nasty things about their lies were that they probably believed them wholeheartedly, as their mind was somehow an obscure zone where imagination and reality were mixed, up here, there, and everywhere. In between alertness and delirium, they got totally confused. A pharmacist has to outsmart them by being calm and authoritative at all times. Trin was very confused in her first few years handling them, as she was a believer in human goodness. But as the time moved on, she learnt to act accordingly. Sometimes they just needed a strong, authoritative voice to stop them from sliding further into the abyss and prevent them from falling deeper into their drug habits in certain days and time. There was Deanna, whose first word was always a sorry, a customary utterance which Trin suspected resulted from childhood abuse. At first, Trin tried to convince her not to say sorry from the start of each sentence, but she gave up eventually as she kept saying frantically sorry over and over again the more she told her not to. Poor soul. She often commented on Trin's appearance. "You look fresh and glowing. I wish I could look and feel like that." Trin thought at least she had given someone inspiration. There was Thomas, another one. Traveling to the city by train at one time, Trin was greeted warmly and personally, like an old friend, by a man with full body tattoos, lizard hair, toothless, grimy, disheveled, and carrying in one hand a bottle wrapped in a brown paper bag. "Hi, Trin, how are you? It's good to see you. You're looking sensational as usual." He almost gave her a hug at the station. She laughed and gave him a salute, avoiding the potential hug coming her way. Indifferent to the astonished look of passers-by directed toward the spectacular scene, Trin replied, "Good to see you too, Thomas. Still downing the bourbon at 10 o'clock in the morning? Back to the other habits yet?" she asked jokingly, as he had left the pharmacy over a year already. It was sad to see them struggling with their habits, both drinking and using drugs, for their whole lifetime. Some could move on with their living as best they could, but some stayed with their habits. Trin often reminded her children, "Stay away from heroin or anything that causes addiction, but most of all heroin. It's lethal. Once you're hooked on it, it's your life sentence, kids." They would all chorus, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, Mum." Then Trin told them that her book was almost finished. Eddie said, "I'll buy one, Mum, and I'll ask my friends to buy some too." "Ah, that's great to know, darling. Very comforting to know that," Trin smiled. The others would look as if she was joking. "That's very good, Mum. Very proud of you, Mum." At the time, while writing her book, she was confident that she would be able to explain to the rest of the world what she was trying to say. The conflicts of the Vietnam War, the exodus of Vietnamese boat people, the difficulties of resettlement and life in general, being a woman and a mother. Then she was afraid that although the story was still unfinished, her words had all dried up. Finally, she hoped that her dilemma and her experience would help people of similar circumstances regain their equilibrium by reading her book. However, at the time, Trin kept wondering if it was a futile attempt, with her crude efforts to write in a language still foreign to her even after almost 40 years. Would anyone be interested enough to read it? She often had to light 3 incense sticks with the offerings of tea, fruit, and cakes in front of her Buddha shrine, asking for courage and determination and begging the spirits of perished soldiers, deceased refugees, boat people, her ancestors, her father Nguyen, her sister Betty, and her brothers Dien and Mac. the lot to give her strength and enough vocabulary to write page after page as promised. You know, I disciplined myself to write at least 500 words a day, 5 days a week, and I was counting them every day. Hey, but I did read them back sometime as I was afraid of falling into the same nightmare as Jack the Writer in the movie The Shining. Do you remember that movie? Was it Jack the Writer or Jack Nicholson who played him? Drin told Helen, a close friend of Kim and hers since they first arrived in East Hills Hostel. Yeah, that's a scary one. All work but no play makes Jack a dull boy, or something like that. Wasn't it that he kept clicking away at his typewriter on the same phrase for hundreds and hundreds of pages? Yep, you're not wrong there, Helen. However, believe me, some of my pages are different, and I'm not going insane or trying to kill anyone with an axe. Both would laugh at this joke. At the same time, my assistant would ponder for a while about my dilemma of writing 500 words a day, then say, "But some of the words are the same, aren't they? They're not at all 500 different words, are they?" She was clearly puzzled about it. Yeah, by luck, some of the words were repetitive to the point that my editor had to scream, "Stop, stop, cut, cut," telling me to chop out many paragraphs in the book. As in my writing fever about communism, I kept returning to that as an obsession. I almost became Jill the writer with the phrase, "The communists and communism are the main enemies of my people and we detest them," over and over again. They laughed again with that discomforting statement. But you know, ask any refugee who escaped during the exodus of boat people in the 80s. Those two words raised hell in their mind. And I'm the same. I'm one of them. If it was not that horrible, we would not have left, Drin explained to her children. Drin often wondered what her life would have become if she had stayed back in Vietnam, but she knew that she had given her children the best start in life in Australia. She would not think of herself as anything else but Australian now, and was so proud of it. Following ODP, Miss Nguyen and Dr. Huang migrated to the US in 1989. Tan remained in Vietnam, a childless widow, and became a successful merchant after the normalization of trade in her country. An and Sue continued their open street bar trade for a while, then disappeared without a trace, perhaps suffering a fate similar to many others who perished at sea in the Exodus. Mai migrated to the US a few weeks after her recuperation period in a hospital in Terengganu. However, she suffered a mental breakdown when she stepped down onto Californian soil and has stayed in an institution from the age of 18 in 1978 until now. Her parents were so distraught without news from their only daughter that they tried to escape several times but unsuccessfully. In the end, their final trip, with 100 others, was lost in the Pacific Ocean. Nguyen drowned with most of her family, her mother and her two sisters, when her boat was scuttled too far out, leaving her father, Lam, the only survivor to escape, in 1979. Uncle Tam was arrested in his attempt to escape shortly after Nguyen left, and no one knew of his fate after that. Mike was forever searching for his identity. He managed to assimilate into his new home in California, doing odd jobs in Little Saigon, but remained a lost soul, wondering whether he belonged anywhere. He never found his parents. Little Nguyen, who was so excited to leave Saigon during the chaos, grew up to become a successful restaurant owner specializing in pho in Paris, France. Yang, a retired Australian tax officer with a master's degree in Asian studies, moved on after a few years grieving for her husband and then migrated to Washington, D.C., USA. Kate, Yang's daughter, is married with a son and a daughter. She is working for the Australian Department of Finance with a law degree and living in the capital city, Canberra. Anthony, Yang's son, works for the Australian government with an IT degree. V remains a single woman. After more than 30 years working as an electronic technician for a telecom company, she has recently retired as well. Dean passed away with liver cancer within 6 months from his diagnosis. His wife and two sons remain in Vietnam. Juan, a computer programmer, divorced after more than a quarter of a century of marriage with his first love. He is living in Texas and is searching for a new beginning. He has 2 grown-up daughters. Kim works for Australian Department of Defence as an assistant director with an IT degree. She is married with 2 daughters. Luke, a social worker helping street kids and delinquents, has a son and a daughter. He has recently reversed to being a bachelor again. Trin's macular degeneration is under control. She believes in the advancement of technology and hopes for the perfection of bionic eyes invention in the future. A friend of her commented recently, "I don't know how macular degeneration might have affected you in any way, but I can see that your eyes are still as bright and shine as a barn owl which can spot a spider 100 kilometers away at night." She is so proud of her children and remains a soft-spoken, timid person despite her years of dealing with the world out there. President Tran Van Huong was placed under house arrest by the Vietnamese communist regime after the fall of Saigon. In 1977, his civil rights were restored, but he declined. Instead, he asked for all officials of the ARVN to be released from prison before he would take his place among the freed. His request was ignored. The former president died quietly in his own home in Vietnam in 1982. President General Nguyen Van Minh was never seen again in public from that historical day, April 30th, 1975. It seemed Hanoi compensated him for his inert warfare tactics during the last few weeks of the war and allowed him to live quietly. By surrendering readily, the president had managed to avoid for both sides the bloodshed and carnage of the fighting during the chaos. He was kept in seclusion in his own home for several years before being allowed to migrate to France in 1983. He remained silent and stayed out of politics until his death in California in 2001. After 40 years, the communist Vietnam has introduced nothing to the outside world, both in terms of productivity and acclaimed intellectuals or academics, but prospered on falsified wealth from which a majority of party members and their family have gained through bribery and inside trading on the expenses of the Vietnamese citizens. Rural developments are minimal and the peasants are still living in the similar environment without running water and basic sewage system as of half a century ago.